Your manager got nicer after you said no. That was the first signal, not the relief. Suddenly, every conversation sounded softer but stranger. The warmth stayed on the surface while the respect slipped underneath. What you're experiencing has a name. It's tone policing, and it often starts right after one clear boundary. Over the next few minutes, I'm decoding the pattern. You'll see why it happens and how it spreads. The first shift is rarely open conflict. Your words stay the same, but your delivery becomes the problem. And the second shift is worse. That's where your competence gets separated from your credibility. You know this feeling if you've lived it. The meeting ends and somehow your sentence becomes your attitude. You ask for realistic deadlines. By Friday, the story is that you're tense, hard to please, and resistant. You declined a last-minute request during PTO. Nobody challenged the boundary directly, but Slack suddenly feels colder afterward. The comments sound polished, even generous. Let's keep this collaborative lands where direct feedback should have been. Nothing official changes at first. Your role stays intact while the emotional framing around you starts quietly tightening. That is why it feels disorienting. You're reacting to a shift in meaning, not a shift in policy. Imagine this. You walk into Monday's check-in, and your manager says your energy felt sharp last week. No missed deadline is mentioned. No bad decision is named. Only your tone enters the record. And once tone enters the record, evidence becomes harder to defend. Feelings start outranking facts without ever saying so. Tone policing works because it changes the battlefield. The conversation moves from observable work to interpretable personality. That move is strategic, even when it looks casual. Output can be measured, but likability can be endlessly negotiated. What looked like concern is often control. If the standard is emotional comfort, the standard can always keep moving. This happens to smart women especially fast. Competence without extra softness makes some workplaces feel psychologically exposed. You are useful enough to depend on, but if you stop cushioning everyone else, your usefulness starts looking threatening. That is the hidden trade. The organization rewards reliability, then punishes the moment reliability comes with a boundary. The boundary itself is often ordinary. You ask for scope clarity, decline weekend work, or challenge a vague metric. But here's what makes this worse fast. The boundary is rarely discussed as a boundary. Instead, it gets translated into temperament. People stop reacting to your request and start reacting to your supposed delivery. That translation protects the system beautifully. It lets managers avoid the substance while preserving their image as fair. If they debated the actual issue, they'd need facts. If they debate your tone, they only need an impression. And impressions spread faster than documentation. A single phrase in calibration meetings can reshape an entire promotion cycle. She communicates well, but sometimes comes off intense. That sentence has stalled more careers than open criticism. Because it sounds balanced, people trust it. The compliment in front makes the accusation behind it harder to challenge. This is where the pattern reveals itself. You are being repositioned from credible to difficult without anything fully explicit. Once that happens, everything you say gets pre-filtered. Neutral questions start arriving to others as examples of friction. A man asked for headcount and sounds decisive. You ask for headcount and suddenly need coaching on partnership. A coworker misses context and calls you abrupt. Nobody answered your earlier Slack message, but that part disappears. That matters because withholding creates the reaction. Then your reaction gets recorded instead of the withholding. What you thought was incompetence is sometimes strategy. Information is delayed, support stays partial, and your frustration gets spotlighted. Imagine this. Your priorities change in a reorg, but nobody tells you until a skip-level questions judgment. You say, I want to make sure I understand. Could you clarify the metric? They hear defensiveness, not precision. You follow with, can you put that in writing for me? Now the room feels suddenly uncomfortable. Not because you are wrong, because written clarity interrupts the convenience of managing you through mood. And once mood becomes the management tool, your emotional presentation starts carrying heavier penalties than anyone else's work quality. Tell me in the comments if you've seen this. Not obvious conflict, the polished version hiding behind concern. Maybe it happened after you refused extra coverage. Maybe it started after you corrected something inaccurate in a meeting. If this sounds like you're weak, you're not paranoid. You're paying attention to a pattern most workplaces normalize. And I want to know where it showed up: performance review, Slack silence, promotion cycle, or one-on-one. Because naming the setting matters. The setting tells you which kind of image management is operating. Now let's go deeper. Tone policing is rarely about etiquette. It's about restoring the old emotional arrangement. Before the boundary, you were easy to route around. After the boundary, you became a person with edges. Edges force decisions. Managers who benefited from your flexibility now need justification, documentation, or actual resource planning. That creates discomfort in systems built on invisible labor. Somebody has to absorb pressure, and it used to be you. So the system looks for a faster fix. It reframes the woman setting limits as the woman creating tension. That reframing also recruits coworkers. People protect themselves by aligning with the safer social interpretation. They don't need to attack you openly. They only need to say you seem stressed, sensitive, or hard to read. Notice how vague those labels are. Vague language is powerful because it survives where facts would collapse. No one can disprove being intimidating. No spreadsheet can fully refute being not collaborative enough. But here's the next sign most women miss completely. Praise becomes private while doubt becomes public. Your manager tells you privately that you're strong. In talent reviews, you need softer executive presence. You're trusted with burnout-level work, but not with visibility. Reliable enough to use, never centered enough to reward. That split is not accidental. It keeps your labor accessible while your status stays negotiable. And once status is negotiable, support becomes selective. Mentorship appears when you're compliant and disappears when your name patterns. Fake support often sounds incredibly polished. "I just want to help you land this better" can mask a warning. The warning is simple underneath: make other people comfortable or your competence will keep costing you. That is why smart women start self-editing. They slow their speech, soften emails, and over-explain reasonable requests. They write 3 versions of a Slack message. They remove one sentence, then another, until the point nearly disappears. This is expensive, and not just emotionally. It drains time, clarity, and authority from every normal interaction. Meanwhile, the workplace reads your caution as proof. See, she knows her tone is an issue. That feedback loop is brutal. The more carefully you manage perception, the more perception becomes the metric. Here's what to watch for next. The conversation stops being one incident and becomes a story about your style. Once style becomes the story, history gets rewritten. Every old disagreement suddenly becomes fresh evidence of your pattern. A delayed launch, a tense meeting, a skipped happy hour, separate moments get stitched into one convenient reputation. And reputation drives decisions long before paperwork appears. Promotions, succession planning, and high visibility work move through private interpretation. You may never hear the real sentence. It happens in calibration meetings where nobody needs to quote you exactly. They say you do strong work, but there are concerns. Concerns about approach, tone, fit, or leadership maturity. Those words matter because they travel upward cleanly. A director can repeat them without sounding biased or threatened. What looked like fairness is actually image management. The language stays neutral while the consequence lands specifically on you. Imagine this: layoffs are rumored, budgets are tight, and suddenly your manager starts documenting ordinary friction as collaboration risk. Nothing catastrophic happened, but during a riff or reorg, vague concerns become perfect material for defensible exclusions. That is why women often feel blindsided. The emotional file was built long before the formal file appeared. And tone policing works especially well in hybrid work. Fewer hallway repairs mean impression hardens faster through fragments. A short email feels colder. A delayed response feels sharper. Digital communication gives projection far too much room. So if you've been thinking, maybe I'm overreacting, stop there. Ambiguity is exactly where this pattern likes to live. Strategic awareness starts with one question. Did the pushback address your point, or did it reroute toward your demeanor? If the substance disappears quickly, pay attention. That is often the moment the workplace switches into perception control. Start noticing sequence, not isolated incidents. Boundary first, social shill second, tone comments third, visibility drop fourth. That sequence matters more than any single comment. Patterns reveal intent where individual moments still look deniable. Your first defense move is not confrontation. It's clarity, memory, and clean language that gives them less emotional material. Say, "Thanks for the feedback. I'll think about it." Then document what was discussed and what wasn't. Use neutral phrases that buy you time. "I'll check my notes and circle back" protects clarity in flippery conversations. If a metric feels vague, slow it down. "Can you clarify the metric?" pushes things back toward substance. If pressure rises in a hallway moment, redirect calmly. "I prefer to discuss this when we have time." None of these lines are dramatic. That's exactly why they work inside offices built on deniability. Your goal is not winning the moment. Your goal is preventing your nervous system from becoming the evidence. Because once you sound rushed, they point to urgency. Once you sound hurt, they point to sensitivity. That doesn't mean becoming flat or fake. It means refusing to donate extra expression to someone else's narrative. The next layer is documentation without performance. Heap dates, requests, shifting expectations, and witnesses without announcing you're doing it. Quiet records matter during PIPs, reviews, skip levels, and exit interviews. Memory feels personal. Timelines feel harder to dismiss. And yes, notice who gets context earlier than you. Information narrowing is often the first operational consequence. Maybe you're removed from pre-meetings. Maybe decisions move to side channels while you keep receiving polished summaries. This is not always paranoia. Sometimes access is being adjusted before your reputation is formally downgraded. If you sense that shift, widen your observation. Watch who repeats your language later with less resistance attached. Watch whose frustration gets coded as passion. Watch whose directness is leadership while yours becomes interpersonal risk. This comparison is not petty. Comparison is often the only way hidden standards become visible. And here's the painful realization late in the pattern. Tone policing is often the cleanup crew for power. It appears when direct retaliation would look too obvious, so the system disciplines the boundary by disciplining your delivery. That is why the experience feels both subtle and devastating. Nothing enormous happens, yet your footing keeps moving. You are still doing the work, but now you're also managing other people's discomfort with your self-respect. That double load creates burnout fast. Women become underpaid, overused, and quietly framed as the complication. So ask a sharper question about your workplace. Does this culture reward competence or competence wrapped in emotional service? Does psychological safety actually exist there? Or is safety reserved for people who never interrupt the unspoken arrangement? If you've seen this pattern, tell me where it started. The boundary, the phrase, the week everything changed. And if this decoding helps you name what work keeps blurring, subscribe and turn on the bell. Because the earlier you recognize tone policing, the less of yourself you hand over trying to disprove it. A healthy workplace responds to boundaries with clarity. An unhealthy one responds by putting your voice on trial.